Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the next episode of Authors Bantering. I'm Josh Breslin. That's Ian M. Rogers. And this week, we're going to go over how to be a good literary citizen. And admittedly, Ian, I even asked you before we shot this video, what does that mean? Because for me, I have not heard that term before.
No. And I think I used it because I was maybe fumbling for the best way to describe
It's a good
what
word.
I want to talk about this week. It is a good word, I think. Because people talk about being a good citizen in other ways, like voting and things like that. But what does it mean to be a good literary citizen? What does it mean to be part of a literary community, a writing community, both a very small one or potentially a much larger one? And I think I'm thinking back to a book I read by the editor craft writer Melanie Faith, where she talks about this. But it's this idea that if you're a writer, especially if you're, whether you're an emerging writer or a more established writer, it is a good idea for you to be involved with other writers, with writing, with books that you enjoy, and to support those writers and those books in some way. And this could be as simple as, buying their books, reading them, and enjoying them.
Mm-hmm.
Things like leaving reviews online, which are always tremendously helpful for writers, telling other people about books you enjoy, engaging with those books. But it can also be things like contacting writers that you admire, especially if they're, more indie writers or, not maybe super famous writers, or you'd have to write to them care of their agent or something like that. But the idea that, you can just shoot somebody an email and say, hey, I really liked your book that came out last year. I really liked X, Y, and Z about it. Keep up the good work. Looking forward to the next one. And something like this can be one, it's really inspirational for the writer. And then two, it kind of spreads this kind of goodness in a way. I'm thinking of like the 90s movie Pay It Forward in that way, which is not a very good movie, but the concept I think applies here, I think.
Yeah.
And that if you can support other writers in that way, they will also support other writers in that way. And then also, I think in some ways that, this is how people can make contacts in
Yep.
some way. And, people talk about networking and how do you network and things like that. And it's not just, shaking hands at conferences or, like kind of suit and tie type stuff. But networking can be just as simple as saying, like, hey, I read your book, I really liked it, and dropping somebody a line. And I've had I've sent those kinds of messages to authors, and I've had them respond, like, oh, thank you so much, thank you for taking the time.
Mm.
They've actually Googled me, looked me up, or maybe like saw the website in my email signature, and they've looked me up, and then bought my book and left me reviews as well,
Oh, wow.
because they were, not because I asked them to do that or because I expected them to do that, certainly not, but because they thought that I was an interesting person who was maybe interesting to know and wanted to see what I was all about too.
That's awesome.
So I think in the as far as growing your network, things like that can be really important. I will say though that you shouldn't go about this kind of literary citizen stuff expecting that. I say that because, if someone is expecting that or is, saying like, oh, I'll review my book if you review yours or something. I'll review your book if you review mine. It can feel very transactional, sleazy sometimes. You might be reaching out to a writer who's, not interested in your book because they write something very different than you are writing. And in that sense, it's going to come across as very, I don't care about you. I just want somebody to review my book
Yeah.
kind of situation. Is this making sense in the literary citizen kind
Yeah,
of
I get what you're saying now. Yeah, and that it's you're exactly right that just doing decent things, like just getting that good karma, is huge for this business. And not treating it so transactional, not going in with sort of the idea that I'm going to get something out of it, but just simply being a part of it. But I'd say even more importantly, I'd say at least half the things you mentioned should be things you should be doing anyways, just if you enjoy books, right? Like if you like
yeah
books, read. Like
yeah
read authors' books. You know what I mean? Like if you're a writer,
yeah
you should just be enjoying books as it is. Same with reviews, right? Leave those reviews, put those. And I'm very lazy about that. Admittedly, I don't leave nearly as many reviews as I should. But yeah, leaving those reviews, whether it's on like Goodreads or Amazon or something like that, because yeah, the it comes back around. It will eventually be your turn, and it will be good to have that kind of backing already.
But even more than that, I think in your what you said kind of alluded to this, but didn't specify it. But when you say you should be doing those things anyway if you enjoy books, because those things should be enjoyable to do. When
Exactly.
I read books or when I review books, it's not an annoying chore that I have to get through as if it's like homework, but it's something like, hey, I like leaving reviews. It's a good kind of break from my day or from an afternoon. I like reading new books and checking out different kinds of books is
Yep.
very interesting to me. And so it doesn't feel like work in this
Yeah.
sense. So I mean if it's feeling like work to do to you as a writer, then maybe you should step back and think like, wait a minute, like, is this what I really want to be doing? What do I want to be doing? How do I want to be engaging with books in the writing world? And if the answer is not very much, or there's not very many things that you actually want to be doing, then maybe you're better off doing other non-writing or book type things.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, there's a certain self awareness you need to have that, like, if you aren't enjoying that, this might just not be something for you. And not everyone has to enjoy every aspect of it. But yeah, this all kind of ties in. But on a bigger, I guess, a bigger argument for what you're saying is, and it's kind of a sad thing to say, is we're kind of all we have. Like, if you're a writer, like, other writers are pretty much all you got. Like, the literary community is really small. Like, the amount of people that read books regularly that are not writers or people who don't write, it's not a whole lot. Like, it's a pretty, I mean,
Certainly compared to things like, people who watch Netflix
well,
shows or go to see Marvel
exactly.
movies in the
Yeah.
theater. I think that's I mean, like, person for persons, the audience is still pretty large, but it's not as large as, say, professional sports or, people who are watching, Game of Thrones, or,
Bingo.
something like that.
No, exactly right. And I mean, I think, what was it? Like, I think Americans read an average 2 books a year or something like that. And obviously they're lying. Like, I guarantee you, the average American does not even read 2 books a year. I'd be willing to bet that since high school or college, whenever you end your schooling, the average American probably in like 10 years will not read 10 books in 10 years.
I
I might be wrong,
I
but
one, I think I
yeah.
agree with that. And two, I would guess that the 2 books number probably comes from a lot of people who read 0 books a year, and then a lot of people who read 50 or more books a year. And I'll
Yeah.
bet that the people who are reading 50 or more, that's raising that number up from all the zeros or the
And
ones.
there's sort of the Pareto distribution, right? Where, like, of the 2 books people are
Mhm.
reading, right? They're probably reading like Game of Thrones, or they're reading, Hunger Games, or some sort of established book, right? They're not reading the new up and coming stuff. They're reading books that already have movies or TVs based upon they want to check out, right? They're not reading the newest novel by this person, or this local author's stuff. They're reading the mainstream, like the most mainstream content. So, like, other writers are kind of all you have in a sense, right? Like, it's sad to say it, and I wish it wasn't this way, but like, we need to kind of rely upon each other here a lot. So there's sort of an element of us needing to kind of come together in this very sort of trying time, if you will. I'm not trying to sound like a politician here, but
No,
like,
no, no,
you
no.
need
This
to.
is and again, I like what you're getting at, and I think we're rounding this out pretty well. I also want to say I think that there's a lot of writers who, don't think about this because it's like, oh, I'm busy, or what good would it do, or it's not going to have any effect or whatever. I'm thinking of there's a lot of talk about marketing online,
Yep.
and a lot of talk about like, okay, if I spend this much on Amazon ads, or if I get my book in here, or if I get a book trailer for this, or social media that. And again, those can be all very great ways to promote a book, but if a writer's only doing those things and they're not engaging with real people or talking to other writers, or certainly, reading books, reaching out, doing these literary citizen type things, then could become a little bit too much like a business, or the business aspect could take over the more human element,
So
or you
true.
could be even overlooking different ways of reaching authors because you're so ingrained with this, like, oh, I'm just paying for Amazon ads or something like that.
That's a good point. And in fact, I think, I was going to say this before, but I think you kind of put a good idea in my head, which is, I'm betting that if you, as a new author, had invested as much time into reaching out to other authors and like leaving reviews and being good citizen and all that stuff as you did probably trying to figure out how to market and how to sell your work, you'd probably be able to make more sales at the end of, like, say, a year or 2 years or 3 years, basically having just done the basic stuff of being kind, just because you get those connections. You do get those one-off events, or like the one-off, hey, come see me read it here at the library here, and we go, and there's like 8 readers there, and they ask what you do. You mention you're an author, and one of the people goes, oh, what's your book? And you can make a sale that way, right? You probably eventually, through that chain of causality, probably make more progress selling works just by being a good citizen, as opposed to being a good marketer.
I think that's a very true statement. I think it's especially true for writers who don't have a lot of money to
Yep.
spend on marketing. And I think it's also true for, again, writers who are just starting out and are maybe looking to maybe meet more people in their communities or at these kinds of events where, one person, 2 people, 3 people, 4 people makes a big difference versus 0. Whereas
Yeah.
if you've published a book and it's just sitting there on Amazon and you're waiting very patiently or something like that. I think that this kind of outreach and real person communication and going to things and getting in touch with other writers and other readers, I think can be tremendously powerful on the small scale, certainly versus doing nothing. And then also maybe more than doing other kinds of traditional marketing, maybe more clumsily or at a smaller scale.
Yeah. Great. Yeah.
I will say also, and again, this may be an elephant in the room kind of thing, but a lot of writers are introverts, and this is very, very true.
Yeah.
A lot of writers would never get on YouTube, to talk with their friend about writing topics, because that's, scary for them. But even if you're an introverted writer, and the idea of going to a conference terrifies you, or the idea of giving a reading on stage terrifies you, or even reaching out to an author terrifies you, I would say maybe look at what you're comfortable with in terms of reaching out to others, forming a community, being a good literary citizen. And maybe it's just as simple as leaving reviews, or maybe even star reviews if you can't do that, or maybe you decide that you are ready to email an author whose work you really, really enjoyed, or you are ready to, go to the conference or the reading and just kind of look around, but not actually talk to anybody.
Yep.
I would say, think of ways that feel comfortable for you, and then ways where you can maybe step a little bit out of your comfort zone and try something new, because that's how growth happens. And it doesn't happen by saying, no, I can't, or I'm not going to do this because X.
Yeah. And I mean, no kind gesture is ever going to go unknown, right? Like, in other words, like if you leave a nice review or reach out to like an author and like, hey, I really enjoyed your work or something like that, right? Like, they're never going to like call you out for it. Like, there's never going to be a bad reaction. At most, you get no reaction, which is sad. But like, there's never a net negative to it.
I 100% agree with that. I have never had something bad happen as a result of contacting somebody or telling somebody I like their work after a reading or anything like that. Not once. The worst that could ever happen is that they would not reply or not say anything. That's the absolute worst that could happen.
Nice. Excellent, man. All right, and so I think we kind of hammered this point to death a little bit, which is awesome. It's not something that ever gets talked about here, and again, the writing industry and a lot of AuthorTube in general tends to be kind of focused on more of the self-centered side of it, right? Like what can it do for you? What can you benefit from, right? In this case, this video here is to kind of keep in mind, you got to kind of pay it back, right? You got to send the elevator back down as well. And so hopefully this resonates with you. If it does, make sure to give it a like. And with that, we will be back next week. I'm Josh Bresslin, and that's Ian M. Rogers.
Take it easy.